Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. If you have any questions you'd like to ask or advice you'd like to give, come on over to podtherapy.net and join the conversation. Good news, everybody. There is still good in the world. Moments ago, I was contacted by a man from the Geek Squad at Best Buy who let me know that I had a virus on my computer, and by simply giving him all my personal information, he was able to fix the problem over the phone. Just when you've given up all hope for humanity. And now, broadcasting from an undisclosed location, that guy is Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangeman. It's time for some pod therapy.
Oh my god. Yeah, I've gotten that email. I've also gotten generous offers.
No, this was a phone call.
This was a phone call?
Yeah.
Oh god. And he says, hello, I'm from Geek Squad, and what's your social, and where do you live?
Yeah, well, he called from Geek Squad, and then he said, I had a virus, and somehow I was on their network.
Oh, wow.
Like, no.
No.
And so I'm like, no. And I just hung up. Then he called me back.
Oh, wow. Okay, that would almost get me. Like, if you call back, you ever get the calls where the phone number that you're seeing has the same digits as your number? Like, at least the back end?
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Am I calling myself?
I get those at least twice a day.
Do you really?
Yeah.
I get a lot of phone calls from a very friendly woman who says, hello, this is Stephanie from your local banking center. And I'm like,
Right.
How do you know the name of my bank? How do you know I bank at local banking center?
We should open a bank. You
Just
and I.
called
Call it
local
banking center.
Local banking and home loans.
That seems legit.
And car warranties. That's the other one I get. Your car warranty may have expired. I'm like, what? I mean, maybe it did. I feel like it's plausible. So, but we are in a new location. Last week we are in Nick's Blanket Fort. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nick, for hosting us at Fort Blanket. We enjoyed it. This week we're trying a new location, which is my actual real life therapy office. And there are pictures that you will find on our Twitter, both of me therapizing Nick, who is classically laying on my couch, may or may not be wearing pants, and you will see some pictures of our little setup here at the desk. So check us out on Twitter, and you can enjoy that, or on Facebook. This time we will try to make sure we post those pictures. So lots of fun.
Yeah, we'll see how this goes.
Yeah. Fun times.
All right, so we have an interesting A segment today.
Okay.
Actually, this came up while Jim and I were out eating sushi.
Yeah.
We just happened to see on SportsCenter.
Yeah, we're like mid-bite, and
yeah.
like I look up and I see this thing on SportsCenter on the TV, and there's like something crawling up there, like the little news feed, and I'm like, what? Like I grab Nick, I'm like, look. He's like choking in the middle of his shrimp.
Yeah, and it was a perfect story, so I tried to get some more information, and I don't really have the whole thing.
Okay.
But essentially what we got from the crawler is basically what's happening. So here's kind of what's going on. This has to do with mental health and the NBA.
Okay.
So
the National Basketball Association.
That
NBA.
That's the one.
Got it. The professional NBA.
Right. Not the National...
Boy Scout Association.
Boy Scouts. All right. Anyway, so this has to do with Kevin Love of the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah, great player, all-star player.
Yeah, recently kind of became the unofficial spokesperson in the NBA for mental health.
Oh, wow.
After opening up about his challenges with depression and anxiety.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So in a game against the Atlanta Hawks, I guess this happened earlier in the season, this past season, he actually had a panic attack, his first ever
in the game?
In the game.
Oh, wow.
And so the whistle was blown. He went to the sidelines. He said he couldn't catch his breath. He thought he was having a heart attack. So he tells the bench, like, I'll be right back. And then he goes in the locker room, goes to the trainer's room, and just basically collapses.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Pretty traumatic event that happened. And for anybody who's ever had a panic attack, like, it's no joke.
Yeah.
It's not like you're just having a little bit of anxiety.
Yeah, and he's an all-star player. Like, this is not some random guy. This is Kevin Love, like, part of the champion Cavaliers.
Right. Absolutely. Well, so since then, he's kind of become a lot more outspoken and kind of talking about mental health issues, especially in the NBA. And it has been met with
Kind of mixed review?
Some mixed results. I mean, some people have been supportive of him coming out and talking about that and saying, they can relate, and so they think this is a good thing. Other people, because of the stigma and just being naive, kind of look at this as being weakness.
Okay.
Like, well, he just can't handle it or something like that.
So I can see that being like the human people watching the game response, like one half going, oh, okay, whatever, he's human. The other side going, dude, you're supposed to be a superhero, like shake it off. But what's interesting is the thing we saw in the crawler kind of took it a little bit deeper. Which is the next
thing, which is really looking at the treatment itself and the owners having rights to the notes. Therapeutic notes.
Yeah.
So I had never really thought of that. To you and I, that seems absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
This is confidentiality.
Yeah, I'm not telling you anything.
Vital.
Yeah.
To having good therapy. You have to know that what goes on stays in that room.
Yeah.
But then from the owner's perspective, they look at this as saying, no, this person is our investment.
Right.
In the same sense that if they have a knee injury and that is going to affect our outcomes, we need to know their health condition. So they are including mental health into their overall health and saying, basically making that argument. Now, not all owners are on board with this.
Okay.
And the NBA itself isn't on board with this.
I see. So it's a large conversation that Kevin Love's situation sort of brought to the forefront. Right. And now the teams and the league and the players are having this talk.
Right. So now they're going to have to weigh in on this and figure out a solution.
It's so interesting because it's sort of topsy-turvy. So usually everybody's saying, guys, let's think about mental health as part of health, right? There is no health unless you have mental health. And ironically, the NBA and the Owners Association is kind of saying, yep. In fact, we agree so much that the league rules say that you're not allowed to hide your health status. You don't get to go get a private evaluation, a private MRI, or a private X-ray on your knee and discover that it's 3 games away from permanently blowing and you're never going to play again. And we're talking about renewing your contract for $10 million or $100 million. Their argument is we are entitled to that information by virtue of your career. You chose this career. Your physical performance matters. So we so much believe that mental health is part of health that actually we feel entitled to that information too. So they're almost making an equality argument. If it is true that mental health and physical health are equal, then it is inherently our business and you can't hold that back.
Right.
Wow.
Now, I see what they're talking about. Now, the long-term ramifications for that, let's just say that happened. Where does that line stop?
Right.
If the NBA does that, and then the NFL does that, and then let's say colleges start to do that, what's in the middle of that from, let's say, your current private employer? Because they are also investing in you too. Yeah. Not to the tune of millions of dollars, but they want to know that you're healthy. There has to be some sort of boundary set up between your own personal health and who you're working for.
Okay, this is going to fascinate you. I kind of disagree.
Okay.
Let me dive into this with you. I kind of do. The other day on Twitter, there was an article that came out from The Atlantic, and they were discussing how the President of the United States is expected to get a physical examination and how that's sort of released to the public, right? If he is hours away from death or is a huge heart attack risk, in theory, we're supposed to know. Now, ironically, we've had like 44 presidents and we never seem to get any information, but like Franklin Delano Roosevelt was handicapped. He was paralyzed due to polio.
Kennedy had his back issues that were very
and so they didn't tell us this kind of stuff. And so there's this conversation of like, okay, well, shouldn't a president be fit physically to perform their duties? Now, there's an amendment to the Constitution which says if the president becomes incapable of performing their duties by virtue of physical health or mental health or further incapacitation, then basically his cabinet and the vice president can elect to remove him and place the vice president in power. I believe it's the 12th or 25th Amendment. There's a 2 in it. That's the best I've got.
Sure.
Probably not the 12th Amendment. On that. Yeah. So the article that I was reading was saying, listen, a lot of people are really interested in President Trump's mental health. And the article was making some interesting speculation that some have suggested that he might be in early onset dementia. And we all know that Franklin Roosevelt suffered a stroke. His wife, Eleanor, basically became the president and nobody knew about it, which is, inspiring, but also we didn't elect her. Like, you shouldn't be able to declare war or levy taxes. Right. And then the same thing had got brought up in other situations where not just FDR, but gosh, there was another situation it was similar to Trump. Oh, Reagan. Reagan also, it turned out, had Alzheimer's and dementia, and ultimately it took his life, and he couldn't remember anything in his life. And there's evidence that at the end of his term, in his second term, he was already going through some of this. So the argument is being made in this article that because all health matters, and mental health even more so for a person who has their finger on the nuclear button, there ought to be an independent, nonpartisan commission whose job it is to evaluate the President of the United States and basically publish a report. And their argument was, we have the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, which scores bills based on numbers and says, hey, we're nonpartisan, we don't have a dog in this fight, here's the math. And their argument is that should happen there too, that the people are entitled to know the mental health status of the commander-in-chief. So I take that argument and I kind of contrast it and compare it with what the NBA is saying, where, hey, these are professional athletes. They're making tens of millions of dollars. The destiny of the franchise depends on our ability to predict their performance and play. We, the owners at least, have a right to know. And I think that there's an argument to be made. Like, another question is, what about a CEO of a really important company?
Right. Okay.
Like, that's important stock information. Like Elon Musk in this last week. Elon Musk, owner of Tesla, owner of SpaceX, really interesting entrepreneur. He sat with a journalist and he admitted that he has been depressed and that he has not been sleeping. He's taken Ambien to sleep, and he's been under tremendous pressure the last year of his life, working 120 hours a week. Sure. Stocks fell. They plummeted. He lost $8 billion of value in his stocks the day the article went live. Right. Because the investor class reads about this CEO's mental health and thinks, okay, I don't trust this company anymore. And now he's talking about taking it private. So there's like 3 examples for at least an argument that says maybe this is some kind of entitled business.
However.
Okay.
Kevin Love doesn't work for me.
Right.
Donald Trump does.
Right. And if you're an investor in Tesla, Elon Musk does.
So, yeah. So maybe I would be more willing to give Elon Musk for Tesla than I would Kevin Love and his mental health status.
Okay, and I agree with that. I'll give you that, but here's the counter argument. If you are the owner of the Cavaliers and Kevin Love is your employee, you're allowed to know his healthcare status so that he can perform his duties. The NBA requires that you don't keep that a secret from the other owners and the other coaches. And the reason why is because you could pretend like your guy is totally ready to play and your opponents have to prepare thinking about him. And then in truth, you're going to bench him because he's completely debilitated, injured. And so like in football, that's not allowed. You can't hide Tom Brady's broken ribs. Like, you have an amount of time before you have to classify him as injured. And so in this case, the owner kind of needs to know, and the owner sort of has an in-writing responsibility to classify the player as injured reserve or whatever, or incapable of performing, or probable or questionable. And there's certain league rules that apply to that, which everybody signed on to. So I don't know, man. I think it's an interesting thing, but in our listeners' daily lives, if they're out there and they're thinking about getting therapy, a lot of them are wondering right now, wait, you can tell my employer? They can call and find out? Just for everybody's peace of mind, can you at least explain to the listeners how insurance works and, who does find out? After you've diagnosed a patient, who do you tell and who actually can ask you questions?
The only person or the only entity really that could have any of that information would be whoever's paying for it, which would be your insurance.
Now, what if your insurance is an employer insurance? You get it through, so you work for Walmart.
Right.
Walmart is your insurer. They hire Blue Cross, and then you use Blue Cross.
Therapist would be able to report to Blue Cross. Blue Cross cannot report that to your employer.
Walmart. Oh, interesting. Okay, and that is the normal truth.
Right.
Now, the only exceptions to that, though, there are new situations where Starbucks and some other companies are so big, they are becoming their own insurance. Like, they are not hiring a Blue Cross. They're just doing it themselves. Right. And so that's interesting. But I believe that even in those situations, they have to kind of create a third party. There has to be a wall of separation. There has to be a wall of separation. And so your employer really can't ask those questions. But there are examples of times when they can. Like if you're a military person. So like we have an Air Force base out here in Las Vegas, Nellis. And I've had situations where I've had Air Force, personnel who have come to my office and said, hey man, I want to meet with you. I need to work on some stuff. I have high level secret clearances, right? And they can't know that I'm doing therapy. Like it could be problematic for my career. So I'm actually needing you to not bill my insurance. I'm just going to pay out of pocket. And they'll do that as an extra line of like privacy to make sure that their insurance, TRICARE, doesn't even know because they don't trust the Air Force to not meddle in that information or to find out and use it against them. So I get it though, that's like a government employee though, right? Like that's a unique situation about national security.
Yeah, it's a unique situation. But I mean, this is something that everybody should consider because the last thing that we need to do right now is to make it more difficult for people to seek help.
So what do you think? Do you think Kevin Love's information, how ought it be handled?
I think mental health should be kept completely separate.
But aren't you conceding that it's not the equal of physical health if you say that there's different rules for it?
Yeah. In this situation, yes, I would. And it's difficult to say that because we fought so hard for mental health parity.
Right.
Right. So equal treatment for mental health as same for physical health. However, I don't know, because then I would say, well, he's hired into a position for his physical effort.
Right.
Well, but mental effort's part of that too.
I think it is. Mental confidence, mental ability is a huge part of your performance. But then where do you draw the line? Like if his grandmother who raised him passed away, but it was not something that people knew about, because he hasn't seen her in 10 years and then she passes away and now it affects his ability to play. Does he have to report that? Do we have to indicate that he's in grieving? And are we going to have therapists on ESPN who are like, okay, so this is how the 7 stages of grief works. I predict Kevin Love's at 3. I mean, I kind of want that job. So I'm kind of for this because I think it'll open up some employment opportunities. Guys like you and I could be on the news, man. We could be really important.
Yeah, I'm fine not doing that.
Yeah. Come on, this is our one chance to be on ESPN Sports Center, and you're blowing it. You're advocating for privacy. So if you were the coach of that team, you wouldn't want to know.
Oh, I would want to know.
Okay. Absolutely, you would have a policy where it stops with me.
But I'm not the coach on that team. I'm the therapist. And as a therapist, because he even came out in this article and he said, had it been public, or not public, but out to everybody in the NBA, there's no way he would have gone into therapy.
Oh, okay. So wait, he was saying if everybody could have known about it at the time, I would have been too scared to go get help. But people didn't know at the time, and he did go get help.
And he did get help. And that's why he felt comfortable, because this all kind of came up when a journalist asked him about it in a press conference.
Oh, so it's way after the fact.
Yeah, because somebody basically asked him, have you ever sought treatment for mental health?
And he was like,
came out and said, yes, I have. And then that's when kind of the doors opened. But he said, had he not gone to get help, he would have never admitted to it. Well, obviously, because it wouldn't have gone. But if he knew it would have gotten out to everybody, to the coaches or to the teams and all that, there's no way he would have sought help.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's a really good debate. I enjoy the dilemma of this debate because it's not one of these things where it's one side is clearly right. I kind of see all of it. And especially whenever you widen that out to well, does the president owe us some kind of evaluation? Should all senators, all governors get some kind of evaluation? You have to get a mental health evaluation in order to get a top secret clearance. You have to get a mental health evaluation in order to be the White House's janitor.
Well, even to be a pilot now.
To be a pilot. Yes.
I think so.
Yeah. And annual evaluations. And police officers have to get annual mental health evaluations to make sure that they're okay to be out in the field and carrying a gun.
Here's another point though, too. Is that when that happens, if, say, a pilot for Southwest needs to go in to get his mental health evaluation, what results does Southwest get?
Oh, okay.
They don't get a whole copy. They just basically get a thumbs up.
Right, yeah.
Good to go.
The therapist is specifically trained by the Department of Transportation to know what he needs to be looking for. And in the end, that therapist makes the call and just says pass or fail or pass with conditions. Like, I'm going to pass you, but John, I expect you to be going to therapy so often, prove to my satisfaction.
Even in those situations or those circumstances, there is information that is protected under confidentiality.
I see. I like that. No, I think that you're right. I think that, and that's my argument with the president thing. I think that you can make a third way. I think you can do something that is in between. It goes to the front of the New York Times after he sees a therapist, the president does. And he never has to, and there's no expectation whatsoever, and he's literally commanding the most deadly weapons in all of human history. Like, that's problematic, right? So I think that, like, an independent commission, there's the middle ground here where they're nonpartisan. It's an independent commission of, like, 10 therapists from different disciplines. They all do 1 day of roundtable with him, and they pass-fail. You know, like, hey, the president's mental status is sound. He is clear for duty. Or, we have deep concerns. We've reported this specifically to the Senate Intel Committee, and only that one committee gets to know the full report. They will deliberate and determine what action gets. But I mean, for accountability, like, I can see this. So the point I'm making about Kevin Love is that he should not be the president. But I mean, that's another question is like,
should he?
Or should he? Yeah. Why is it that just because somebody has anxiety, they're not qualified? So that's a really good point too, is we don't want to dip into like these biases.
He's less qualified to be president?
To play basketball, yes. But that's only because the performance was there, right? And I would say the same thing if he was driving semi-trucks. If he was prone to panic attacks and he was on America's freeways with a, 20-ton vehicle, his health status prevents him from performing the task of that job. Just the same if you had a broken femur and your job was to load things on a truck. Like, no, your health status prevents you from that. I'd be comfortable with somebody having anxiety or depression being president, so long as I was also convinced that they had the skills to mitigate the effects of that mental illness so that they could effectively do their job, right? But I don't know, dude. I think the president of the United States is at a different level. Like, I mean, you literally can fire nukes without anybody checking on that. It doesn't have to get a second opinion. Like, he can just do it.
Yeah, and I would agree. Those are they're on different levels, right? I mean, if Kevin,
I also think President
Kevin
Trump
Love
should not play
out,
for the Cleveland Cavaliers. I just feel like it's not going to happen.
See, that's where I disagree. I'd rather he play for the Cavs.
Kevin Love be the president.
Kevin Love be president. I think we'd be much better off. But if Kevin Love goes and plays a game that he shouldn't have,
right,
a very few people in America are going to be affected.
Right, yeah.
If President Trump becomes president and he's not capable of it, a lot more lives are at stake.
I think we found our consensus. That's right there in the middle. But interesting. And, guys, if you're out there listening to this and you're thinking, geez, this is complicated, give us your thoughts on this. Have you ever seen this kind of situation and thought, you know what, this is the kind of thing that we need to publicly be aware of? Have you ever worried that your job is paying attention to your health, maybe your mental health, or maybe asking the wrong kinds of questions, that maybe you don't feel like they're allowed to ask and they're overstepping their bounds? To what extent have you experienced this? And give us that feedback, guys, because we're always trying to learn. I think this question, Nick, especially as therapists who provide this care, it's very relevant to us to know, what are our patients experiencing? What's the public experiencing? And, do people feel educated and informed about their rights and, how confidentiality works? And, that's really important for people to know, that nobody's allowed to know this except you, period. End of story. Unless you're going to hurt yourself, then we'll call for help. But otherwise, you're it.
Yep.
And then your insurance gets a very vague report where we usually just give them like a code and say, hey, depression. And they go, okay, cool. That's usually it.
Yeah. The last thing we want is people to be discouraged and away from therapy.
Yeah, I agree. Kevin Love, 2020. Yep. You heard it here first.
Kevin Love, 2020.
Kevin Love, 2020. And Donald Trump for the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's going to be like some Freaky Friday reversal.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have some listener mail about working through pain. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
Hey there, listeners. Do you like ads in podcasts? Neither do we. That's why there are no ads in Pod Therapy, but one day we'd really like to fill this space with encouraging, uplifting, or humorous messages from our actual listeners. We want Pod Therapy to be a listener-driven, listener-supported show, and so I want you to start thinking about what you might fill this space with. Maybe you could write something and we'll read it on the air for you, or maybe you could even leave us a message at our future phone number, and we could just play it. Whatever you're going to do, we want you to be a part of our show, so start thinking about the things that you might want to say. Thanks for listening. We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and our first listener mail comes to us anonymously from the website and is about working through pain.
Okay. The writer writes in, my question is simple. Do you agree with the saying, the only way out of the pain is through it? When I'm sad, I usually allow myself to be really sad, feel the emotions, have a good old cry and everything. It's not like I enjoy the pain. I just don't hide from it. I accept it, dive into it, and let it exhaust myself. When I'm done, I feel better. So it's a brief moment, but can be very scary. Is it bad to allow my emotions to win from time to time?
You know, I really like that question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I really, really like that question because it's sort of asking, listen, if I think scary things or if I think really sad things and I dwell on them, do you need me to pull out of that nosedive? Do you need me to retch away from that and to not stare too deeply into this crystal? Or is it okay for me to just go there and to just, I almost think of it, Nick, as like completing the thought. Like complete the dive and then emerge from it when you're done with it. I mean, my first take, and I'll be really interested in what you have to say on this.
Okay.
I'm kind of comfortable with that. I mean, I'm comfortable. Even if somebody says, listen, I fantasize about suicide, I get to a really dark place, I take it all the way to imagining my own funeral and imagining people saying their goodbyes to me, and I just sort of meditate on that and reflect on that. I feel extremely sad, I cry through it, and then I get a bag of Fritos, and I drink a cup of water. And I eventually get through this, and I do this like once a month, and it's just something I do, and it doesn't cause a clinically significant amount of distress. I'm not going to hurt myself. I do not have a plan, but I'm present in the sadness, and I dive to its completion. I dive to the bottom of the pool. I touch the bottom. What do you think about that? I'm kind of okay with that. I don't have a problem as long as something's not causing a clinically significant amount of distress. And part of me almost thinks of it as therapeutic. In a sense, I kind of think it's healing. But I also realize we're flirting with potentially some dangerous stuff. What's your take on that?
Well, my take on it, I think if we're talking suicidality or anything lethal like that, I kind of pull back a little bit.
Right,
think, okay, well, maybe this is where we need to get some professional help involved.
Right. I don't want you doing it alone. Right. I want you talking to somebody about it. Let them be the judge.
For the most part, let's take lethality out of this. If we remove suicide ideations, and that's not part of what we're talking about, I am 100% for this. This falls in line perfectly with my philosophy, which is don't run from it. Double down.
Okay.
Go into it. Because this is what it's the discomfort that drives people into unhealthy behaviors, which is I get outside my comfort zone. So I don't know what to do. I don't know how to react. I have to find something quick. I have to find some way to soothe this and to work through it.
Run from it.
Right. Which ultimately just pushes you back into your comfort zone. We don't grow in our comfort zone. We grow by pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone. And there's a therapist who was kind of my mentor when I was younger, and she would kind of say the same thing, like just embrace it. Just sit in it.
Sit in it.
Allow yourself to be uncomfortable. And if it's sadness that you're talking about, what the writer is referring to, I completely agree with this writer. They're saying, I don't enjoy the pain, but I don't like to hide from it. It's to get into that moment where you can just sit in it and know, I'm going to be okay.
Right.
I'm going to survive this. And it's one of the things that sometimes people will do with anxiety, right? Where they feel they've got tremendous amounts of anxiety and they feel like they have to act and they feel like they have to do something. But anxiety has never killed anybody.
Right.
No one has ever died from anxiety.
Right.
You can sit and you can be anxious at an 11 on a scale from 1 to 10, and you can do that for years.
Right. I mean,
you will not
you
die.
Don't want to.
It will suck. It will be incredibly uncomfortable, but you're going to be okay. So I think that's a really important message for people to understand. Like with the sadness, with the anxiety, it's perfectly fine to just sit and feel it. Because what the other thing that does that I think is beneficial is it removes the fear out of it.
Yeah.
When we start talking about like anxiety, the biggest part of anxiety is the anxiety about having anxiety.
Yes.
Right? And if you just sit in it and you realize, okay, this isn't comfortable.
Right.
But I'm okay. Now we're removing the fear element involved in it.
So, what's interesting about that too is you just said something that reminded me of a technique. So in solution-focused brief therapy, there's a technique called a paradoxical injunction. And that's really exciting. But the basic way we're talking about it is blowing up the symptom. So blowing up the symptom is whenever, I remember I had this once. I had a guy who was experiencing anxiety, right? And he was talking about how it was so outside of his own control. And like, this just happens to me. It's not something that I have the ability to reach over and grab the dial and turn it anywhere. And so we ran an experiment, which you're familiar with. A lot of times we'll do that in SFBT. And so in solution-focused brief therapy, we said, okay, tell you what, I need you, what's your anxiety at right now? And he was like, it's at like a 7, man. It's really, really rough. I said, okay, I need you to get it to an 8. And he was like, wait, what? And I was like, no, I need you to get it up. I need you to get it to an 8. Well, how do I do that? Do more of whatever the hell you're doing. Like, what are you scared of? Can you tell me that right now? Can you tell me what you're feeling? Well, yeah, I'm feeling this. I'm thinking about this. I'm fixating on this. And I have all these fears. It's like a cascade. Okay, great. Add to that. I need you to get a dozen more of those things flying at you. I need you to grab a few more of those and grab them and look at them. And it was a fascinating thing because, of course, the anxiety comes down. Like it starts to tick down. And it's interesting because what we learn by doing that is to not fear the feeling, and to reach out and grab the knob. And the truth is, if you can turn the volume from a 7 to an 8, if you can look into your depression and you notice that by dwelling on it, by fixating on it, by going through the thought, by visually and vividly imagining it, you can get yourself sadder. What you're teaching yourself is that you actually do have the ability to reach for the volume knob.
Right.
And I think that works both ways.
Yeah, I used to do something similar in residential treatment. Where instead of doing like an intensity, instead of raising the intensity, what I'd do is I'd have them sit and keep the intensity
right where it's at
for an hour. Because inevitably what would happen is they would do that for 25 minutes. 30 minutes.
It's exhausting.
And then be like, okay, I'm
sorry, I'm losing
my
it.
anxiety's starting to come down. I'm like, no,
get it up.
An hour. We agreed 60 minutes. You got to find some way, get that anxiety back up there,
right.
But yeah, you ultimately are teaching that same thing. When you put some kind of number to it, something that you have to do to maintain it, then it gives you that control element. Like, oh, I'm not completely a victim here.
Right.
I can manipulate certain things that will make the situation better or worse.
Yes. And so if you're out there and whatever your symptom, to the writer, he's talking about sadness. If your experience is anxiety, if your experience is anger, if your experience is jealousy, whatever emotion, whatever thing that you're staring into that causes you discomfort, there may be times when there's a part of you that really wants to just explore the feeling. And you're just sitting there with the air running in your car during your lunch break, really just fantasizing about your anger or just really seeping in it or just feeling that anxiety or feeling that sadness or imagining something scary and just going with the thought. I'm comfortable with that. Now, going back to what Nick had said about where we're going to draw that boundary, if we're starting to think about, as Nick said, lethality, so you might be thinking about hurting somebody else or you might be thinking about hurting yourself. At that point, I'm going to tell you, I'd like to know about it. As your therapist, that's where I need you to go ahead and let me know. Sometimes I dive pretty deep in the well of this emotion. And Jim, to tell you the truth, here's something I find down there sometimes. Okay, great. Let me be the one who gets to decide whether I need to reach down there and pull you out. But if you are therapeutically gaining from the experience, as long as you have a spotter, somebody who's watching over you, I'm fine with it. I really am. And I think there can be a lot of therapeutic value to that too.
Absolutely. And one thing that the writer says too, the last sentence here, I want to jump back to that. Is it bad to allow my emotions to win from time to time? So the writer is talking about when they feel hurt or sad to just basically go in, cry for a while, and then move on.
Yeah.
And I would argue, the person saying, is it bad to allow my emotions to win from time to time? I would say, you're actually not allowing your emotions to win. I think that's the point.
Right.
Like, what ultimately is happening is your emotions are coming out when you allow them to come out.
Yes.
So the emotions aren't winning. You are learning to maintain and have control over that.
Yes.
So you're choosing to let yourself have a good cry for 15, 20 minutes.
Right.
Like that, so that's awesome.
It is. And what's interesting though is like, if this person had family or friends or a spouse, and that person's family, friend, or spouse saw them doing this, I can see that person's family freaking out and dragging them to therapy and saying, oh my gosh, my person is uncomfortable, fix them, help them. And I think if I evaluated them and got to see some of what they're talking about, I might say, you know what, this is fine. I like what you're doing. I'm here to look over it. This is okay. But I think other people can really be startled by it. But I want to back up what you just said. The emotion isn't winning. The emotion is being processed on your terms in a controlled manner, and no significant amount of distress is being caused. I can't look in your life and see fingerprints of where problems are arising and brokenness is happening. And so I think that this is really meaningful. There's a lot of people that think that you've achieved therapeutic zen whenever you become Spock and like you're all logic, no emotion, all rationality. You cannot be startled. You cannot be budged. Somebody could fire off a starter pistol next to your ear and you wouldn't even flinch. And like, that's not it. Like the goal is not roboticism. Like the goal is balance. The goal is healthy, mature processing of reality, life on life's terms without abreaction. Abreaction is just dysfunctional behavior, everything falling apart because you don't have a good amount of control. So that's the real goal of therapy. But too often, Nick, people think that our goal is to like deprogram them so that they don't feel anything at all and they just go through life like listless and blank.
Yeah. No, you're going to have just as much emotion as you did before.
Right. Yeah.
You just learn control and you get to decide.
Yeah, and I would argue this is a form of control.
Absolutely. And I think this also is going to benefit in the creation of further coping skills. Like, and this is one thing that I know my clients get sick of hearing me say is to be grateful.
Right.
When things don't go right.
Mm-hmm.
Because when things don't go right, that means that you have to develop a coping skill to deal with that thing that didn't go right.
Right.
So at the end, what are you left with? You're left with one more coping skill that you didn't have before.
Yeah. I can see where that would get annoying.
Yeah.
You sound like the military. This is an opportunity, gentlemen.
Pain is weakness leaving the body.
The only thing to fear is fear itself.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to answer some more listener mail about finding a good therapist. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Hey, TheraPals, have you purchased your tickets to Scoop Fest 2018 yet? Jim, have you?
Scoop Fest! Yes, I have.
Have you?
No, I have not. Thanks for putting me on the spot.
Gotcha.
But now I'm going to go to heyscoops.com/therapy.
So our friends Matt, Paul, and Jacob are working hard putting together the 3rd annual weekend-long comedy and podcast festival in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, October 12th, 13th, and 14th. Enjoy live comedy, variety shows, the Scoop Talent Show, the Jock vs. Nerd Costume Ball,
free beer,
and much, much more. I don't think there's free beer. I don't know. We'll see. And you will get to hear live recordings of your favorite podcasts, such as Matt Mattingly's Ice Cream Social, Pod Therapy, yours truly, the Piff Pod, so Piff the Magic Dragon, Penn Sunday School, Night Attack.
Yeah.
I'm doing this all from memory.
One Player? Player One?
Player One podcast.
Yeah.
Last Podcast on the Left. Smart Mouth.
All the good ones.
Yeah. It's going to be really good. So, please.
And you can join us for sushi, psychology, and sake.
Yes, which we're going to schedule. We've had listeners asking about that. We're going to schedule that. We just got to figure it out when.
We'll get to it.
Yeah,
but you can join us only if you buy a freaking ticket. So come to Las Vegas.
So, tickets at heyscoops.com/therapy to get a $40 off discount.
heyscoops.com/therapy. We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Our next listener writes in asking, how the heck do you find a good rehab? All right, here's the question. How do you find good treatment centers or therapists? I have a family member that needs treatment. After hearing your episode about John Oliver's treatment and shady rehabs, I was wondering, how do you know if a rehab is trustworthy or not? And for that matter, how can you tell whether a therapist is good or not? They all advertise as if they're awesome. That's a really good question.
That is a great question.
I'm kind of scared of that question.
I know.
I feel like it was kind of aimed at me. Is it weird that I'm defensive? Is that weird? Does that say more about me? I mean, what are you trying to say, listener?
Yeah, anytime you see Sin City shrink, just stay away from it. Yeah, no, that's a great question because it brings up a really good point, which is that, okay, and this is kind of funny. So I was at my gym the other night.
Me?
No.
Oh.
my working out gym.
Oh, okay. Yeah, not your podcasting gym. Yeah.
Lift heavy stuff.
Yeah, got it.
And so there was a guy in there sitting down on his laptop just typing away some stuff. And so I kind of struck up a conversation with him. And because I asked him, I was like, do you work here? And he's like, well, I work for this, not this particular gym, but for this branch of gyms.
Okay.
And he's like, I'm just going on and I'm doing reviews on Google for this gym.
Oh, he's doing reviews?
As in, like, he is going in and he's making up fake names to boost the ratings of the gym.
Yeah.
Now, if your local gym does that, I'm sure treatment centers do that.
Yeah.
And this brings up a big point, which is it's really difficult to get a good sense of what is going to be a good treatment center. Because as well as you have some of those fake reviews, you're also going to have some reviews from people who
are real. They really were there.
But for some reason, they got kicked out.
Right.
And
the negative ones you can always trust are real. Right. There's no question those are real. But it's also like, is that the best data, right? Because they were motivated enough to do a review because they're pissed. And they were getting therapy.
and did they not play a part in what happened?
Oh, that's a really good question.
And the other thing too is like if a local restaurant chain gets a bad review, they can jump on and they can comment on it and they say, hey, we're sorry you had this experience. Come, we're doing better and we're going to change some stuff. Thank you for your feedback, blah, blah, blah. And they can try to address that. Treatment centers can't do that.
Right. Because if you leave a bad review and you say, hi, I'm Nick. I had a really bad time. They did not have good food and I was there for methamphetamine use and I was unhappy. If I, the treatment center, respond and I say, hey, Nick, it's Dr. Joven, man, I'm sorry you had such a bad time. Hope you stay off meth. I've just confirmed that you were there.
And you just broke confidentiality.
I broke confidentiality. So like my hands are kind of tied on the internet, ironically, even though you're the one saying bad things about me. Yeah. So I kind of feel for the treatment providers in that sense.
So what do you think, Jim?
Okay. So the question I think is answered easily enough. If we're talking about a hospital or if we're talking about a facility or a rehab, I'll tell you this right now. I've been an insider for years. They're usually not true. If it's a bad review, of course that's real. If they are good reviews, it's possible that they're real because lots of people do tend to leave good reviews, but whenever they graduate from rehab, they're not super duper motivated to turn around and post that online, because if it's a true review, they're usually going to put their own name and face on there and they don't probably want to do that, right? So usually you end up hiring a reputation management firm who does a lot of this for you and actually puts it all on there. If it's a Google review, I don't trust it from the jump. Okay. I just don't even bother trusting it. If it's a Yelp review, I usually do. If it's something from like rehabs.com or something, don't trust them, right? Because that company sells the idea of posting reviews. It's not, some people are going to post reviews. Sometimes they're real, sometimes they're not. If you're even barely questioning this, don't bother trusting it. I say go to Yelp. So Yelp is real, but the other side of the argument is that going to give you an accurate description of the place, right? Because if people leave bad reviews, and I've had this happen where people leave bad reviews on me, and I'm really frustrated because that person flunked out because they smuggled drugs into my rehab and I kicked them out for it. Right. That means I'm a good rehab, not a bad rehab. But they'll post and go, oh, this guy's a jerk.
He wouldn't let me shoot heroin.
Yeah, he wouldn't let me use my drugs. Like they don't ever mention the part where they broke all the rules and committed assault, but they'll say, this guy was very mean to me and I don't think he's serious at all and they're just in it for the money and blah, blah, blah. So, I say go through the website. I think if you're talking about a rehab or a mental health hospital, you need to have faces. I never like it when a company doesn't have real faces or names of their actual therapists. When I see real names and faces, I can trust that those are real people in the community. Another thing is, do they have a third-party credential like JCO, the Joint Commission of Accreditation? If they've earned a standard like that, whether they're nice people or not, they're good at what they do. They had to be and meet minimum standards in order to get those credentials. So I think that's meaningful. Now, on to this other point about Yelp, though. So for years, I didn't know that I had a Yelp. And one day, I'm sitting with a brand new client in my private practice, and I say, oh, how did you find me, by the way? And he says, oh, Yelp. I found you on Yelp. And I was like, what is a Yelp? And he was like, Yelp is a review website. You have reviews. You're on there. And I was like, what? So I freaked out and like immediately got my phone, downloaded Yelp and looked myself up. I had like 4 reviews. Thank God they were all 5-star. Like they were 5-star and people were like, I really like Jim. He's a great guy. And I was like, what? Like, I had no idea this thing existed, and it terrified me, right? Because I was like, I have no control over this. Like, this is really scary. But it did turn out to be good. And one of the things I've learned as a therapist, there's a big debate amongst therapists of should you even put yourself out there? Like, should you invite people to leave reviews on you? What should you do? I do it. I'm very encouraging. I send my Yelp link now to all of my clients. I usually send my Yelp link to colleagues. If I work in a rehab, I'll send it to my professional colleagues and say, listen, I want your feedback and, how you see me and your assessment of my skills and my knowledge may help somebody else find the answer that they're looking for. If you leave a review that says Jim's pretty smart about this and that's what that person's looking for, it could save their life. So I encourage people to review me all the time. Now I have like 6 or 7 reviews on Yelp and thank God they're still 5 stars, but I'm always looking for reviews. And dear listener, if you'd like to review me, you can go to yelp.com and look up Dr. Jim Jobin in Las Vegas and leave your review. 5 stars only, please. 5 stars only.
And while you're at it, rate us on iTunes.
Yeah, while you're at it, yeah. That's right.
Since you're in the mood.
Yes, since you're in the mood to review things, you should probably drop one on iTunes or Facebook. That would be fantastic, or wherever you get podcasts. But yeah, no, I'm for reviews. I think that they're trustworthy. I think that they're trustworthy and go into detail. If it's one sentence and they just say, yeah, he's a really good therapist, 5 stars. They changed my life, 5 stars. I just don't believe it, right? Mm-hmm. But if they go through their story and they're like, listen, this person found me in the gutter. This person and I have been working on anxiety. I really like their professionalism, XYZ. And they really give details. Then, okay, now I believe it. But I think that's how I feel about all reviews, right? Like, if I'm looking for, like, a good place to get a burrito, and one place is like, good burritos, many happy. I'm like, no. I don't know. I feel good about this one.
All right. Good feedback.
Yeah, good question. Thank you for that question. All right, we've got time for just one more question, and this one is also written in anonymously. It says, how much should I know about my therapist's personal life? I've recently started going to therapy for the first time, and I'm having some trouble gauging whether or not my therapist and I are a good fit, since I have no therapy experience to contextualize our sessions. I've asked him 0 personal questions because I'm not sure whether that's an okay thing to do. I'm not interested in trying to delve into the details of his personal life or anything, but it feels very strange to me to share all this information that I am with him without knowing anything about his background. Does he have kids? Is he married? What town does he live in? What's his favorite hobby? Is it okay to ask these kinds of basic questions, or is that totally unheard of and strange? Any insight into how much you should know about your therapist would be helpful. Thanks, guys.
Okay, that's a good question. Is it okay to ask those questions? I suppose. Yeah, it's perfectly fine to ask those. It's up to your therapist to draw that boundary of
whether they'll answer.
Yeah, whether they're going to answer it. It's get used to the fact that you are not going to know as much about your therapist as your therapist is going to know about you.
Yeah.
It's not going to be an
it's not co-therapy.
Two-way street.
Right.
Because as a therapist, there's a lot you have to look out for.
Yeah.
As far as setting really clear boundaries. Look, we're not friends. We're friendly.
Right.
But I'm working with you. I'm in a professional role here, and we're not going to hang out afterwards and have a beer.
Which we don't say, right? Like that would break the relationship. It'd make it awkward.
Yes.
But it's true. What you're describing in that last sentence is sort of the background thinking that we bring to the relationship, which is this is an intentional encounter we're having for therapeutic value and to get therapeutic results. We're comfortable with you knowing things about us. Like in my life, I've had clients ask me, here's a common one because you and I work in addiction. A very common question we'll get is, are you in
recovery?
In recovery. And basically they're saying, are you addicted to drugs or alcohol? Which seems like not an icebreaker question. Like you would not ask your coworker that, But it's common in our profession, and that's fine. We'll usually answer that question, unless we're actively addicted and using, in which case, maybe not. Like, what are you trying to say? What have you heard? What did my wife tell you? Yeah, you seem awfully.
Am I on trial here?
Yeah, what is this? Going to freaking Inquisition? Rate me on Yelp. So, unless it's something that really scares us. But I've got lots of questions. I mean, people ask, I usually tell people up front, I usually have like a spiel where I introduce myself. And on my website, I usually describe, hey, man, here's my, my life, here's my background professionally, personally. Do I have families? Yes. Do I have kids? Blah, blah, blah. But in some ways, Nick, I've also dialed that back. And I've told you about this. Remember a few years back, I had a client, who was not very well. And one day I go into session with him, and this is a client, actually, you knew him as well. We both ran a program once where he was in it. And this person said, hey man, you have a really beautiful family. And I was like, thank you. But I intentionally do not hang pictures of my family in my offices, right? I just don't want that to be out there. And I said, where did you have an opportunity to see them? And this person said, I figured you out on Facebook and I found them. And I said, well, that's not possible because I've got my Facebook guarded. My privacy is at the top level. You can't search and find me. And the person said, no, I know. You mentioned that you mentioned what your spouse's profession was. And I used that information to look them up on a database, found their real name, and then went in to Facebook, found them. Their privacy settings are not very high. And then I went through their Facebook and saw your pictures of your children and found pictures of you with them. And that confirmed that you're their spouse.
That is a lot of work.
That's a lot of effort, right? And so that person wasn't like telling me I'm going to hurt anybody, but that's a lot of effort to satisfy some curiosity about a guy that you talk to once a week about stuff. Right. And I remember after that, I really closed down all my social media and really put a block on it. But I'll still tell people like, yes, I'm married. Yes, I have kids. Here's how old they are, but I'm also guarded about some information that I don't feel is helpful. And if you ask me something I'm uncomfortable with, I'm pretty good at being a therapist. You're not the first person to ever ask me something.
Right.
I know how to get away from that. If you notice I don't answer the question, then okay, take that as a cue. But otherwise, I say, go ahead, ask me all the questions listed in that, writer's question, Nick. I didn't have a problem with any of those. Did you?
Right. No, not really. I don't think any of those are real big concerns necessarily. But again, my rule that I've always had is I will disclose to the level that it's therapeutically beneficial.
Okay.
If me disclosing something about my life can be used therapeutically in that relationship to work towards the client's goals, then it's worth it. If it's not, then I prefer just not having that discussion, not disclosing.
And actually, it's important that you say that because as the listener hears that, they might think, "Oh, is Nick really guarded? What's the deal? He doesn't like to connect with me." That's not the deal. The deal is that most rookie professionals overdo it on the sharing.
Yes.
They immediately want to make this a coffee talk and they sit down and go, okay, hi, my name's Barbara and I'm from West Kentucky and this is my pictures of my children and here's me with my dad fishing and everything that they could possibly tell you. Oh, and by the way, I'm in a bowling league and oh, last night I had a great St. Patrick's Day at this pub and oh my gosh, I love margaritas. They just overdo it and that's a common rookie mistake. And so veteran therapists tend to make the conversation about you. We don't want to distract you with our stuff because whatever we share with you, it could bias what you feel comfortable telling us.
Absolutely. It sets the tone for everything that's going to happen later. I've had friends who went into therapy and, later were telling me about their therapy session and how it went. And, we talked about this and we talked about my therapist's life and we talked about my therapist went on vacation last week and we talked about that and we talked about what my therapist did when they got home and all. And then I asked, did you get to talk about you?
Yeah. When did we talk about
you?
you?
At any point, did you get to say anything? So, it's your therapist knows that this is about you.
Right.
And you are their number one priority. So by them putting up boundaries like that, it's not that they're being unfriendly. It's not that that they're just trying to be rude or cold or standoffish. It's that their focus is on you.
The only question in the writer's question to us that I probably wouldn't have answered if I was his therapist is the one where, what town do you live in?
Yeah. That's the one
I probably wouldn't tell you that. Which part of Las Vegas do you live in? I still do that though. Vegas is a unique place where I'll say, oh, I live in this side of town or whatever. And that's just to tell you which Chili's I'm next to, right? That's kind of it. But if people are like, oh, where do your kids go to school or something like that? It can be a very innocent question, especially if they're a parent too.
Sure.
And, but I'll probably divert from that. And again, you, the client, I don't want you to be scared. Mm-hmm. You just have a natural conversation with me. Mm-hmm. And if you're asking me those natural kind of questions, I'm not offended and it doesn't bother me. In fact, I see it as a positive sign. I see it that we're joining, that you feel comfortable with me. You're letting your guard down and you're curious about the other human that you're talking to. And if I don't want to give you some data, I have artful ways to not do that.
Yep.
You don't have to be nervous.
Yeah,
you go ahead and ask. Ask whatever you'd like to know. Unless you're going to say, like, Jim, what's a list of your fears? What's your blood type? Stuff like that. Maybe.
Still have both kidneys?
How are those kidneys functioning, Jim?
Yeah, let the therapist set the boundary.
Yeah, let the therapist set the boundary. But you just go ahead and ask those questions and be natural, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to ask those questions. I think that that's what makes therapy and mental health distinct again in the healthcare sector. Is the guy who's given you a colonoscopy, you don't care about his human bio. You don't care what religion he is. You don't care how he votes. You don't care if he has kids. You don't care if he can relate to your human story. His only job is to do a colonoscopy while you're passed out. You don't even have to ever have met him. But a therapist, the delivery mechanism of medicinal value is the human. The therapist is the delivery mechanism, is the thing that you're encountering. And so their humanity and their human story, their gender, their culture, their race, their ethnicity, some of their background is part of how they relate to you. And that isn't the most important thing. I would not say that's how you should pick a therapist, is like pick one that looks like you or something like that. I don't think that's good at all. But if there's things that you feel like you kind of would like to ask, feel free to ask. It's very natural for us to get those kinds of questions.
Yep. Great question. All right. We actually have some folks who wrote in about the wedding rings and all of that stuff.
Oh,
Unfortunately, we don't have time to get into that today. But we do appreciate all the feedback, and hopefully maybe in the next episode we can touch on some of that.
That's all the time that we've got for this week's session. Thank you to those who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by sharing this episode. You can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy or on Twitter @podtherapyguys.
Do you want to add your own advice to today's questions? Post your thoughts at podtherapy.net and join the conversation. I'm Nick Tangeman.
I'm not stalking Nick Tangeman.
Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.